شكرا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you, President. Mr. President, colleagues, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Menon, allow me to thank you and congratulate you on presiding the Council this month. I also thank you for convening this important meeting. I'd also like to thank the chairs of the 3 committees responsible for implementation of Security Council resolutions on counter-terrorism. I thank them for their briefings as well as their efforts. And I also thank the respective panels of experts for their work accomplished over the past months. President, recent events have demonstrated the relevance of consistent wariness, that is, the presence of armed terrorist groups, some of which are tied with Al-Qaeda, and the majority of which are transnational extremists and foreign mercenaries who fight the wars for others on the Syrian territory and targets Syria across the board. These are all factors which hardly serve the interests of the Syrian people. The Syrian people who are proud and hope to keep the stability of their country, whether they be loyalists or opponents. Terrorism, destruction of hospitals, of educational institutions, schools, universities, mosques, churches, civil aircraft and diplomatic missions, as well as the looting of factories, the kidnapping of Muslim and Christian religious leaders, the looting and pillaging of archaeological sites and cemeteries, the adoption of peace soldiers working in UNDOF, peacekeepers that is. How does this serve the interests of Syria and the Syrian people? Mr. President, 2 months ago, my country's government submitted an official request for the inclusion of the organization Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Nusra Front, responsible for hundreds of terrorist operations and suicide bombings in Syria, to be included on the consolidated list of the 1267 and 1989 committees. That is the list on individuals and entities related to Al-Qaeda. We continue to await this inclusion, all the more so that some Security Council members have recognized the terrorist nature of this organization. President, this organization has recognized that it executed 600 players in Syria over the past year. In just 1 year. And did admit to this on its website. Sir, we all know now that the spread of extremism and terrorism in Syria is done with the benediction and even support of some council members, and is welcomed and backed by the Salafist and Wahhabite as well as terrorist organizations. Some of these individuals, make claims to being leaders in counterterrorism, and even some members of the council 9 times attempted to adopt a press statement condemning terrorist attacks which led to hundreds of victims, civilian victims, I mean, in Syria. It's bizarre that no mention is made that the chair of the 1267 committee, His Excellency Ambassador of Australia, neglected to mention in his briefing the activities of Al-Qaeda in Syria. terrorist activities. And we're all aware of the scope here. Mr. President, while we did, over the past 2 years, address to the Security Council more than 160 letters on the spread of terrorism in my country, to notify members of terrorist attacks and suicide bombings, barbarous ones, in Syria, and in spite of the statements and reports from the United Nations and states and Western research institutions, as well as prestigious media institutions, which all underscored a spike in terrorist activities in Syria and affirmed that terrorists from across the world were flowing into Syria. To this day, we have in no practical way seen the 1373 committee do something to implement measures for combating terrorism and the necessity to stem financing of terrorism in Syria, to request accountability from states who openly support such individuals. It seems that Syria today is condemned to being the only one applying Resolution 1373 and is a first line of defense against terrorism. The panel of experts of the 1373 committee underscored in its current program of work that it would be endeavoring to attach greater importance to the implementation by states of Resolution 1624 and the implementation of strategies to counter incitement to terrorism or terrorist acts from wherever they may emanate. And here we call upon the committees to increase the effectiveness of their activities through the following measures. Number one, putting an end to the destructive media role headed by the governments of some states to incite to terrorism and spread extremist ideology and deepen divisions, secular, religious, and confessional divisions that would exacerbate the crisis in Syria and in other states of the region. The fight against the exploitation of Internet and other social networks to incite as incitement to terrorism and to fool large numbers of young people, including Americans or others. Third, the necessity to stem financing to terrorist groups. Your respectable council in its presidential PRST of 15 April 2013 reaffirmed the obligation for member states to refrain from providing any form of direct or indirect support to entities or individuals participating in terrorist attacks or related to them in one way or another by means such as the repression of recruitment of members within to terrorist groups, as well as the prohibition of providing weapons to terrorists. And here I should like to make reference to the outcome report of the panel of experts created under Resolution 1973 and published under S 2013/99 on the participation of Arab states in providing weapons to armed groups in Syria. And I would call upon Council members to take all measures here without delay. States who arm, finance, or facilitate the travel of armed groups to Syria or provide a safe haven to these terrorist elements are accomplices to terrorist attacks and participate in the flow of Syrian blood. This flies in the face not only of Security Council resolutions on counterterrorism, but also negate Resolution 2082 and 2083 of 2012, as well as the Geneva Communique, all documents which affirm the necessity of coming to a peaceful settlement of to the Syrian crisis through a Syrian-led political process. President, member states have always affirmed the necessity of ensuring that WMDs not fall in the hands of terrorists, and tasked Committee 1540 with monitoring and coordinating on this matter to ensure that states uphold the provisions of the resolution by refraining from supporting terrorists or be in possession or production of WMDs. It is striking that some member states, including permanent members of the Council and the Committee, attempt to hinder follow-up being provided to the Syrian government's request. That is, sending a technical mission, a neutral one, under the Secretary General to investigate cases of the use by terrorists of chemical substances against civilians and military members in the area of Homs in Syria. I'd also like to reaffirm the government's willingness to host the technical committee, the investigation committee, commission of inquiry on the incident of Han al-Assal, pursuant to the memorandum we agreed upon, which was also part of the message addressed to the for the ASG for Disarmament Affairs from 2013. Sir, last Sunday, on 5 May, military and civilian positions were targeted in Damas, and this was yet another demonstration of a direct link existing between the terrorist policy of Israel and the activity of terrorist groups and mercenaries, foreign mercenaries, who targeted several military positions at the same time as the Israeli incursions. The declaration made by some countries encouraged Israel to undertake this aggression. The Security Council is called upon to shoulder its responsibility in condemning this incident and to call upon states who support terrorists to be accountable. Here, Syria is the target of terrorist attacks, and Council members should call upon these member states to uphold their agreements under international law and the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, I shall provide you with copies of my statement so that you can see the full text of this statement. I thank you, sir.
Je donne